Hello, everyone. It's been a while. I've honestly not had that much time to work on my projects like Sodor or really been inspired to do any videos for this channel. News in Thomas Transformers and especially Doctor Who has been slow. However, I have been working on a little something. This is my Gauge 1 Thomas model.
Beep, 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 beep. Hello, fat face. No one understands my case. You don't know what I suffer, moaned Henry. Rubbish, said Thomas. You're too fat, you need exercise. What would you do then? Run my train on time for one thing. Don't be frightened, Thomas, he laughed. It's only me. Your ugly fizz is enough to frighten anyone, said Thomas.
Percy was too tired to think properly. The docks, he murmured. Ha, sniffed Thomas, we can tell.
Clarabelle, do you know what I think it is? It's ditch water. Ugly indeed. You're like a green caterpillar with red stripes, continued Thomas firmly. You crawl like one too.
Why, James? I'm the one who needs a new coat. Look at me. I'd rather not.
I've always been impressed and inspired by fellow creators who painstakingly replicate the models used in the show from the various eras. Ever since I found @JamosTrainos' Gauge 1 files, I've always wanted to recreate one of these models. I first wanted to create Lady, as I haven't really seen anyone make a Gauge 1 prop from Magic Railroad. I kept pushing off the model though because I had trouble figuring out how to make the eyes, their mechanism, and the face specifically. I didn't want to, or rather couldn't really, commission faces or had access to files to print myself. So the idea of a Lady prop was put on the back burner. Then one day, @ThomasModeler on Twitter released a Google Drive of faces of some of the engines. At that point, I knew that now I should try my hand at Gauge 1 modeling. Since Lady wasn't one of the characters in the files, I decided to try and do the star of the show, Thomas himself. I began printing parts off his body. I used a Bamboo Lab A1 printer to print off all my parts. If I had a resin printer, as well as the time and the patience and the knowledge of how to properly use one, I probably would have, but if I'm being honest, a regular 3D printer works just as fine, even for the smaller bits on the model. I used a 0.2 nozzle to print all the fine details, like the buffers, couplers, and other smaller bits, to get a fine print job. The quality is exceptional and almost resin quality. I got a 0.4 nozzle to do all the larger pieces that otherwise would have taken forever to print. I got all my prints done in about a week with some trial and error along the way. The face was the one part that was the most challenging, or rather the one that came out the most problematic. I had to sand and smooth out the face the most out of all the pieces, as layer lines were littered all throughout the piece. Once all the pieces were printed, I had to go and sand and clean each part over and over and over again. This was the most time-consuming part and took up most of my time. Sanding, smoothing out with putty, sanding again. The putty I used was plastic weld I found at AutoZone. I used it to fill in edges and smooth out parts of the print, especially on the main body, as the cab and tanks were two separate pieces. Superglue was used to attach, and the plastic weld filled in the seam and smoothed out parts of the body. I also did this on the boiler, dome, and funnel, as those parts needed to be smoothed out and appear as one continuous piece. When it came to the chassis, I knew I wanted to at least be freewheeled, with the possibility of becoming motorized later. I printed all the gears, and since I didn't have or wanted to find axles, I printed those as well. Is it the best? No. And looking back, if I ever want to motorize it later, I would probably redo all of the chassis. But since this is just a free-wheeled model, it's not that big of a deal for me. At this point, I was trying to figure out how I was going to do the eye mechanism. I was waffling between just doing the eyes and the wheels, or simply going as far as I could to expand later, when it came to motorizing. I figured at the very least I could get an eye mechanism in there to keep the eyes together and move at the same time. I was actually able to find an eye mechanism from a user 28Pelkey43527 on Tinkercad. They also had a human model to print off. I printed both and thought I'd make a little version of me to have with my Thomas model.
Well, like I promised, here's your reward. Open your hands up, son.
That's a little version of me, Alan. I want you to have it.
I don't really want this.
I painted it up with some acrylics to look like my stream model, and honestly, it looks so derpy and stupid, I just love it. I could probably modify the STLs to make us their top-up hat or drivers, but for right now, having the little me is good enough. Sadly, it does seem their account dropped all the files, so it's probably going to be another search to find human models or eye mechanism models. Once everything was printed and sanded and smoothed out, it was time to prime it. I gave it a few coats, going back to sanding and smoothing out each time. Once I was happy with it, I took it for the final painting. I gave it a coat of ColorShot Splash Blue from my local Walmart because it was the closest blue I had to an early series Thomas, as that was the model I was going for. I used Krylon Gloss Red Pepper for the red on the running board and buffers, as that was the red I had, although I later touched it up with my red acrylic paint because it was a bit too dark. I did the same with the buffers and small running board bits. I used Rust-Oleum Linen White to give it a coat over the face and running board. However, I also touched that up with a mix of gray and white for the running board and the face to better match on screen. I painted up the face with the teeth and the eyebrows as well. I then went and painted the parts that needed to be black because the primer in my opinion was just too light of a black, and the smoke box needed its own coat as well, and the inside of the coal bunker. I had to make a small ledge to lay the coal load from the model files on top, and that needed to be painted black to keep the little vents in shadow in case I ever decided to swap out the printed coal load for some black fish pebbles I've used for coal in my own productions. I also painted the lamps white. I wanted to make the clear glass of the front lamp using hot glue, and as the back lamp is red and not clear, I decided to fill that up with hot glue and then paint it in primer to then be painted with acrylics later on. Once everything was painted, I had to put off the project for a bit as school was starting, although not for long. I got back into it and tried lining it. I was going to use vinyl stickers, but the literal dollar store brand I used just wouldn't stick, and it was difficult to cut without a Cricut. I decided to go with hand painting the lining with my acrylics, and it honestly came out better than I thought. I covered the whole thing in masking tape and went to work. Surprisingly, the multiple layers of acrylic came out like the lining tape used in the series itself, although that wasn't my intention. Once everything was finally painted, it was time to put it together. Attaching everything wasn't hard, and it was honestly really exciting seeing it finally put together. I'm really proud with how it came out, and I mean, it looks exactly what I saw on my TV when I was growing up. There are of course areas that can be improved and changed. The face doesn't fit exactly, and that's mostly to do with how the iMech cutouts were printed and molded. The iMech plate itself is hot glued as well because the screws just wouldn't fit between the iMech and into the smoke box. There are numerous other parts of the chassis that are cobbled together with hot glue and screws that are just a little bit too big for the holes in the printed model, and parts of the model had bow due to being out in the sun when drying. If I ever wanted to motorize the chassis, I'm probably going to redo it entirely, but overall, I'm extremely happy with how my Thomas model came out. I plan on making some rolling stock to trail behind him. Annie and Clarabelle are just too big for my current space, but I'm probably going to print off a truck to hold all the extra pieces and faces, plus to have behind him and complete the look. But that's been my dive into my first Gauge 1 Thomas model. I am really proud, and I hope you enjoyed this look into how I made my model and maybe gave you some tips and inspiration to start your own. It was a really fun process, and I learned a lot about model making. I'll see you all next time.